Hi, everyone, and welcome to BSB Pubfest. We are so excited. This is our very first Pubfest, and thank you so much for joining us for this panel, which is called Pitch It Forward. This panel is to show you how you may pitch a book to a publisher. And we have gathered some of our authors, our guinea pigs, to show you how it might be done. So our publishing team today, which will be giving feedback to these lovely authors and their pitches, comprises of Radclyffe, who is author, editor, publisher extraordinaire at Bold Strokes Books. I'm sure she needs no introduction. And Victoria Villasenor, who is also author, publisher extraordinaire at Bold Strokes Books. And myself, I'm the senior editor here at BSB, and I have a book or two under my belt as well. I love our publishing team today for this panel because all of us understand what it's like to be on both sides of the publishing fence, as authors and as editors, publishers. So hopefully we can bring a full perspective. Okay, I'm going to introduce our authors as they start their pitches. So I'm going to leave that just for now. And first up, we have Jane Walsh, who's going to pitch her novel. Everyone else could please exit quietly. Thank you. Lovely. Okay, so this is Jane Walsh. She is an author here at BSB. She has a couple of novels under her belt now, which is very exciting. Jane, why don't you start your pitch? Tell us a little bit about this book that you would like us to consider.
All right, well, thank you very much, Sandy, and thank you, Bold Strokes, for having me here today. As Sandy mentioned, my name is Jane Walsh, and today I'm pitching a 75,000-word historical romance titled Her Duchess to Desire. Specifically, this is a lesbian regency set in 1810s England, and there aren't a lot of sapphic historicals that are set in this specific regency period. The last time I checked, I don't think there was more than about 24 published over the past 35 years, so it's a bit of a niche. But I think there's huge potential in this genre. Typically, in regencies, there's an emphasis on the marriage mart, the social whirl, scandal, the importance of one's reputation. And all of these are great sources of conflict for a queer woman navigating high society, especially when fitting in was it pretty much meant everything at the time. I also think there's a significant popular interest right now in regencies, and that would be specifically due to the massive success of Netflix's Bridgerton, which is their most watched show currently that they've ever had. And I'm hoping that the LGBTQ viewers of Bridgerton and also fans of the various Jane Austen adaptations over the years, I'm hoping that those viewers might be looking for similar stories, but with queer characters and queer community. And that's what I have to offer. Before I get to my plot, I have one more thing to say about regencies, and that is the sheer proliferation of dukes. Tall, dark, handsome dukes are incredibly popular in this genre, often seen as the ultimate catch. But because only men inherited titles, you don't see the same proliferation of duchesses that are presented as the ultimate catch. So of course, in a heteronormative romance, a woman only becomes a duchess throughout a regency book through falling in love and marrying a duke. But what if you want to write a story about a duchess? And what if that duchess is a lesbian and she's looking for a lover? So without further ado, I present the plot of Her Duchess to Desire. Anne, the Duchess of Hawthorne, has one major problem in her life: her husband, the Duke. After they got married 10 years ago, he left England and started hosting scandalous parties in France with his male lovers. Now, the fact that he's gay isn't Anne's problem, because she is too. But their lavender marriage was supposed to protect them both and allow them to pursue same-sex affairs under the cover of a straight-seeming relationship. The fact that the Duke abandoned her and started generating the exact same rumors that they had sworn to avoid, well, it turned their relationship into a marriage of inconvenience. When the Duke returns to England and threatens to bring scandal right to Anne's front door, she's furious. So she decides to make it physically impossible for him to come home. She hires a designer to turn the house upside down and specifically to strip every stick of furniture from the Duke's master bedroom. That'll show him. Letitia Barrow is that designer. She's made her career working with middle-class businessmen, but when she's offered the opportunity to work at a ducal mansion, she jumps at it. This could secure her reputation. Besides, working for a duchess who was hell-bent on rebelling against her husband is very interesting indeed. Letitia doesn't know what's happening between the Duke and the Duchess, but she's starting to wonder if the Duchess might share Letitia's own sapphic desires. She thinks only time will tell. After all, Letitia isn't someone who's ever hidden who she is. It's no secret that she has affairs with women, and although she was born into the gentry, she works for her living and not for something respectable like a governess. All of these things should disqualify her as a lover for a duchess, especially one like uptight Ice Queen Anne, known as the stickler of society. Letitia tells herself she shouldn't be interested anyway. The last time she was seduced by a member of the nobility, she got burned, and she has the illegitimate son to prove it. Her Duchess to Desire is about private life and public reputation. It's about the family you have and the one that you make. It's about female ambition at a time when women were expected to submit to their husbands. So if you want to read about two women finding love through the importance of choosing home decor, the innovation of hot water baths, ice skating while being held scandalously close, and flirting over oysters on the half shell at a public eating establishment, then I hope that you'll consider accepting Her Duchess to Desire. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I love that. That sounds wonderful.
That's great news. Thank you.
I love the title too. Her Duchess to Desire. I feel like that kind of gives you both the Duchess part, which tells people exactly the genre, right? And as you said, dukes are very popular. So I feel like for a lesbian novel, the Duchess is the equivalent. But you also have Desire in there, which tells people it's a romance too. So it's a great title for marketing.
Thank you.
I know that you have a lot of experience with this genre. Would you like to comment on Jane's pitch?
I would. First of all, I'd like to say in general, it's a fabulous pitch. I mean, you started with two of the most important things in my mind, which is the title and the word length, because remember, you are not pitching to readers, although you did a great job. If I were a reader, I would definitely want to read this. You're pitching to a publishing team or an editor. So it's critical that the first information that you give out allows them to automatically tell exactly where this book would fit in their list if they're an editor that's looking for a book. And you said right away, 75,000 word historical romance set in Regency England. Right away, I know exactly what this book should be and the things that I'm going to be looking for. So that's, when you're giving a pitch, that's key. I happen to be very fond of Regencies. So the real challenge, I think, for same-sex Regencies, and you're right, there aren't very many lesbian Regencies. There aren't very many same-sex Regencies anyhow, although it's a little easier if you're writing men, because men in the time had a lot more freedom. But one of the challenges is, how do you integrate or reconcile the realities of the time in terms of same-sex relationships and what readers expect in terms of a happy ending? And I think you've touched upon that a little bit. I would like to know how you end the book, because again, remember, I don't want you to give away too much because there might be readers in the audience, but in general, you're going to need to tell in a pitch how the book ends if it's something that's critical to make the genre work. And so I would like your ideas in general, without giving away too much, on how do you end up with two people in a happy ever after or happy for now relationship in this time? How are you going to work that out?
I do think that's a great point. I have two things that I think are working in my favor. One is that I've spent, this would be my third book. I have two other books, Her Lady to Love and Her Countess to Cherish. And throughout those two books, I've been kind of setting the scene of a kind of wider society of a queer community. These books are not just about found family, but they do touch upon the fact that there are a lot of people in London who shared these desires. And it actually turns out that the Duke is kind of one of the heads of this kind of community. Like, he spent his time in France being very public about his liaisons. And so people understand that the name, the Duke of Hawthorne, it means something to that queer community. So there's kind of a safety in numbers, like the Duke and the Duchess are both queer. And the book, in a lot of ways, is about their coming to terms with themselves. Like, it's a marriage of convenience plot, but through friendship, which I thought was really interesting. And so by the end of it, everybody within the marriage is kind of okay with having extramarital affairs. And they're very protected by their rank and by the fact that there are other people like in their lives that are supportive of these relationships.
I think regencies in general, heterosexual regencies, have really created an environment where it's quite understood that there are marriages and then there are affairs, and there are often marriages and there are love affairs. So that precedent has been set. I don't want to take up everybody else's time, so I'll move on. Vic?
Yeah, I thought it was a fabulous pitch as well. I liked how you connected it to readers, you know, who like Bridgerton, and Austen kind of adaptations, again, so that we understand where you're situating it. And, you know, this kind of convenient marriage, fake marriage trope is, I think, a popular one. I think one of my questions was, what is the primary conflict keeping your two characters apart? There's the reputation issue, which obviously is understandable and quite logical. But what is it behind closed doors that's keeping them from being together?
Yep.
Well, one of the things I didn't touch on too much in my pitch was the fact that Letitia does have an illegitimate son. So she had an affair with a nobleman 20 years ago, and now she has a son who is 20 years old, and he's trying to enter the workforce, and it's very difficult for him as an illegitimate son. And his father did not provide funds for him to go to university, so he cannot become kind of a gentleman and enter like a gentlemanly profession. So there's a lot of conflict between Letitia and her son about the nature of rank and power and ambition. And Letitia is very reluctant to enter a relationship with the Duchess because she doesn't trust the nobility. She thinks that, like, on the one hand, like, they don't have a concept of how kind of the regular people function, and they're maybe a bit capricious and maybe a bit thoughtless. And she's very concerned about that, like, in their relationship. So that's one of the primary forms of conflict.
Okay. And for the other character?
Anne is upset because she has a lot of trust issues, because when she entered into her marriage of convenience with the Duke, they did it as friends. They planned to really have this ideal kind of lavender marriage that would give them both protection. And when he left, it absolutely crushed her. And she really doesn't feel that she can trust again, especially in somebody who claims to be an equal partner, because she has been kind of left before. So that's very difficult for her to reconcile.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I think that's a great question, Vic, and it was actually the one I was going to ask, so I'm glad you asked it. I think that this is often an issue one sees in works that are romances plus, whether it's a historical romance or romantic intrigue or a romantic fantasy, that sometimes one element of the plot actually overtakes the other elements in the plot. And it's very important in historical romances in particular to remember that the primary plot is the romance. As much as we love the time period and everything that goes with it and all of the social issues that we're discussing, the strength of the story will be in the romance arc. So those internal conflicts are really important. And it's something to remember as you go forward, you know, working out the story arc.
Yeah, I think
That's a good thing to keep in mind.
for sure. just quickly from my perspective, just to add to what both Rad and Vic have said, what I like about this idea is that you have a lot of intimacy in the fact that they are redecorating this house together, which puts them alone, right, in a, you know, somewhat enclosed space for a legitimate reason, which gives them a lot of time together to build your romance. And that's a huge plus for this novel. And before you had mentioned, in response to Vic's question, my question was going to be, what's the other side of that? How does the society and the impact of, you know, that have on their relationship? But throughout this conversation, I feel like we have covered both ends, and I feel like it's a real strength of this book that you are able to do both, because for a lot of historicals, a lot of regencies, the courtship takes place in a public environment, right? And of course, I'm just going off my very poor knowledge of Jane Austen here, so forgive me, but that's my understanding. And so I really like this idea that they are alone together for extended periods of time, and that you can use that to build a queer relationship in a way that you really couldn't do as well in a public environment, because they are not able to be out as queer and have the same privileges that they would have as a heterosexual couple in terms of courting each other. So that's great. I think it's a great story, and we are so lucky to have you, Jane Walsh. And I can't wait to read it.
Thank you.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Oh, do you have
Thanks,
any
Jane.
questions for us before you go?
Yes. So would you be able to tell me a little bit about the general editing process, like after a book would be submitted?
Sure. So I asked our authors if they would have any questions, if this was a real pitch and this was their first book with us, what they would want to know. And for Jane, it's tell us a little bit about the editing process. So why don't I pass that to Vic, our lovely editor, who can tell us a little bit about what it's like.
Well, first I send a welcome letter and I say hi and I introduce myself, because I think there are elements of the process that can feel really intimidating, and it's really exciting and it's so amazing, but it's also kind of scary because you don't know what's going on in the world and what the next steps are necessarily. So I send a message and just say, hi, you know, this is who I am, this is what we're going to be doing. And I give a rough idea of schedule so that you have an idea when it's going to come to you and how long you'll have to get it done and back to me. And I use the notes that have been provided. So Rad will often, both Rad and Sandy will send notes with a manuscript to say, here are the things that we maybe think need to be worked on. Keep an eye open for these things. So I mentioned that, and then I do a read through of the entire manuscript to get an idea of it and see kind of how it holds together as a whole. And then I go through and edit, and I keep those notes in mind. I go through and check kind of that character arcs are in place and romance arcs are in place. And as Rod was saying, you know, that what needs to be focal is focal, particularly, you know, the romance arc. And then I send it back, and you have time to go through it along with my editorial notes. And all of us send editorial notes with our manuscripts to let you know kind of a breakdown. Here's a large scale thing to go with the manuscript, and they work very much side by side. And then you get those edits done, you send them back along with any questions you have or concerns you might have, and we go back and forth. If through the process you have more questions, we work out a time to Zoom or Skype, as it used to be. I don't know what we're using anymore, but and we can chat about it. And that way you don't ever feel alone. And you always have kind of a cheerleader beside you, helping you through the process. So it's not just you in this vacuum. And then once you and I are done going back and forth, it might go to a copy editor as well, who then goes kind of line by line, so you get another chance to go through. And then the copy editor sends it back to the bosses, and it goes to a proofreader, and it goes through lots of back house kind of things. I don't know if Sandy, you want to take over there.
Oh, sure. I mean, I think you summed up the editing part well. So after that, I would go to the proofreader and the typesetter and to the printer. Thank you so much, Jane. That was a great pitch. We so appreciate it. We are definitely publishing that book.
Fantastic. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Jane.
Thank you. So next up, we have Sander Santiago.
Hello.
Sander is a relatively new author here at Bold Strokes Books. It doesn't feel like it because I feel like we know each other so well over Zoom. You're here to pitch your next book with BSB. Why don't you go ahead whenever you're ready?
Okay, again, my name is Sander Santiago, and today I will be pitching romantic speculative fiction entitled One Verse Multi. Life was good. New job, friends, love, and discovering the multiverse is in danger. Wait, what? For the last 10 years, Martin King worked as a rift repair technician for the Multiverse Protection Corporation, or MVP, closing gaps between universes. Ready for a change, he joins a research team tasked with answering some exciting questions about universe multi-people. His new co-workers include a French cowboy, a tech-savvy fashionista, a goth princess, an alternative computer whiz kid, and the non-binary voice of reason. Not to leave out Luca, the stone-cold hottie data manager. They are the perfect home for any Black trans man looking to make some exciting new discoveries. Exciting quickly becomes troubling as his team learns the multiverse is on a fast track to a collision event that could destroy everything. Not only does the data point to disaster, but new Mandela effects are a big clue that something is not quite right. But just because they have information doesn't mean they have answers, and the team is stumped at solving the puzzle. As the team work to piece together the clues in the data, Martin learns the universe isn't the only thing in his life that is multi. His love life takes an interesting polyamorous turn. One of the research team's most important subjects turns out to be a young man named Titus Avery. Even though there are 3,000 universes with a Titus, Martin meets the one belonging to the Fox universe before he's charged with studying it. In the name of science, despite his own affection, Martin breaks it off with Fox Titus and turns his attention to the distinguished Luca. Luca is one of the first to see the approaching disaster and enlists Martin's help to collect evidence beyond their research. Lucky for Martin, their long hours of study and secluded nature of their company gives him plenty of time to flirt with the older scientist. But as the mysteries of the multiverse danger grows, it becomes clear that Titus won't be left out of the adventure. The game changes when Titus puts the data team onto a key Mandela effect that helps pinpoint the center of everything they have been studying. Martin travels to the Fox universe to talk to Titus just in time for Titus to be kidnapped by an anti-MVP group who demands to meet with Martin. The bait and switch gets Titus home, but leaves Martin at the mercy of the group. While in their presence, Martin learns that the anti-MVP group names his company as the sole source of universe multi-damage and tells Martin that MVP is even willing to murder to maintain their monopoly on the multiverse. Even though the anti-MVP group claims to have a plan to fix it, if Martin can provide some key company secrets, the group reminds Martin too much of his own bosses for him to trust them. Plus, he doesn't condone kidnapping. With the help of a rogue anti-MVP group member and a Titus that doesn't like Martin very much, Martin returns to the research team. With growing pressure from the anti-MVP group, as well as the continued decay of the multiverse, Martin knows that it is up to him and the data team to fix it all. Throughout this 1,010-word romantic speculative fiction saga, One Verse Multi, Martin King must figure out who is really to blame, how to stop them, and how to fix the damage. With the love of Luca and Titus and the genius of his team, and some carefully planned bluffs, Martin might just pull off the biggest repair of his career. One Verse Multi reflects its audience base. Seekers of this novel will be educated, career-minded 20 and 30-somethings with just a hint of imposter syndrome who believe in the power of found families. Woven through with pop culture references, scientific deductive reasoning, and approachable world building, One verse multi approaches fan favorites like The Big Bang Theory. This is How You Lose the Time War by Amal Al-Mantor and Max Gladstone, and How to Live Safely in the Science Fictional Universe by Charles Wu. There is an outcry in markets across genres for trans and POC main characters, as well as in speculative fiction, which features a wide range of identities. One verse multi will be a hit with audiences.
Thank you so much. That sounds great. I love it. I think you did a great job hitting a lot of keywords, which are really important when you're pitching to a publisher. Using words like trans and polyamory and things like that are so helpful in kind of indicating to the publisher, as Rad said on the previous one, where this book is going to fit in their list and how they may be able to market and sell the book. So that was really awesome to see those woven so well into it, that it didn't feel like a list of keywords, but that they were all there. So that's great. Rad, do you have any comments?
Oh yeah, a few. First of all, yeah, it was a really good pitch. Again, as Sandy said, you placed your work right away. Romantic speculative fiction, which is kind of like not a common combo. I mean, speculative fiction is almost, well, it's generally plot driven and not character driven as much, although the characters are critical. I mean, every reader needs to care about the characters. But speculative fiction, especially this kind of speculative fiction, is very dependent on world building, and that the plot itself, you know, the world is at stake, as you put forth. Kind of at the end, I kind of like, you know, it sounds like the multiverse is collapsing, and that's the stakes, that's the challenge. And I think that you might want to move that up in the pitch and make that really clear that in terms of the speculative fiction plot, that's kind of what's at risk for everyone. You know, I'm a romance reader, so I care about what's happening with the characters, but in speculative fiction in particular, you're going to hook your readers with the big, exciting picture. So I would push that up in your pitch, and I would also put it, you know, really up front in the book. As you introduce your characters, make sure you introduce the plot challenge. The one thing I got a little red flag was pop culture, because pop culture is time limited. It's, you know, it may be pop culture now. The book is going to get published a year from now, and hopefully it's going to be selling 10 years from now. So you want to be sure that whatever the pop culture references are have meaning to your readers now, but are going to be at least somewhat understandable in the future, because you want this book to have a long life. So that's just a little niggly detail. The other question I had was about Titus. Is he in a different multiverse than Martin? Is he, so he's in a different world?
Kind of.
You know, they're kind of like all happening at the same time, but are they in the same verse?
They are not from the same original verse. Martin and his company are sort of outside of the general multiverse, by way of like the trajectory of human existence. So there's several multiverse or several verses that they operate in, and Titus exists in most of them, but they're sort of omnipresent to the multiverse at this point.
Are they the same? I mean, do they have the same psychology? Are they different minds? So they're the different individuals, different Tituses, different.
Yeah. So the idea behind the Tituses and like the setting of the multiverse is that if you exist in more than one universe, you're relatively similar to yourself. It's just somewhere along the lines there was a difference. So I chose to go to this college instead of that college.
Right.
And then there exist two multiverses.
So they diverge because of some choice at some point in their history. So they're not exactly the same.
Right.
Okay. All right. Otherwise, I mean, I think, as Sandy already said, that what's going to make this work, it's queer. That's important. You've got a lot of diversity, also important, which is also very common in this kind of work. So although it's not particularly unique to this kind of work, it's unique for a lot of our readers, a lot of queer readers who may not be reading this kind of work. There's, there is some very, very good queer speculative fiction right now coming out. So I think the timing is perfect. So I would say that this is a work that has a place. And by the time it's published, there's probably going to be a little bit more out there that's going to help in terms of positioning this. So I think you did a good job with it.
Awesome. Vic, anything to add?
Yeah, I had pop culture references written down too, because that's something I flag a lot. Because it can feel like you're reading a book that has a lot of in-jokes that you don't get, which I think can end up kind of frustrating a reader as well. One of my questions, I mean, I love spec fic. That's where I sit. I liked how you described your cast of secondary characters, so that we get kind of this sense of the cast that are involved. I thought that was nicely done. One of my questions was to do with the romance arc. What is the problem with the romance? Who is conflicted about getting together? I wasn't terribly clear on that.
So there's a romantic relationship between Martin and Luca and Martin and Titus. The issue with Martin and Titus is primarily at first work related. So Martin studies the multiverse. Titus is one of their subjects, and that is just sketchy, and Martin knows it. So he cuts it off at that point. But then as the book progresses and as they move into bigger issues, Titus keeps reoccurring, and they end up having more room to be able to be together. And then with Luca, there isn't conflict on Luca's side. Luca is very much interested in Martin, but he's also older and patient, so he's willing to wait out Martin's conflicts with approaching him, which is this idea of having feelings for Titus, working together. What should I be focusing on in my life, work or this guy, that sort of thing. And so the turmoil between Martin and Luca is primarily Martin's, and figuring out how to approach all of his feelings.
Okay, all right, cool, thank you.
I like that, because you already have a large, complex plot with a lot of stakes, you know, and a primary character that's going to carry your story. So having a romantic conflict that's really well interwoven into the plot that you already have works really well. So then you're not dealing with a whole set of separate issues as well. So I think that's a great idea. Do you have any questions for us?
I do, but I'd also like to just take a quick second. Both Radclyffe and Victoria mentioned pop culture references, and I feel like maybe that's not quite the best phrasing, but I couldn't think of a different one, in the sense that I feel like with that, I mean, this world we live in and the way people engage with each other is sort of meme based, and these characters sort of invent memes amongst themselves as you go along. So it's sort of pop culture feeling, but everyone's in on the jokes because they're created, or it's because it's stuff people talk about all the time. Like Mandela effects are, I would consider a pop culture reference, and people can name one, or their favorite one, or their least favorite one, or one they believe or don't believe, and those sort of get tossed in into the mix and conversation amongst the group as well. So I'm not sure. I also worry about pop culture references in speculative fiction. I've read some, I'm like, this is a long time ago. I got nothing on this. So I wanted to quell concerns as you make your selections on choosing my book I've considered it. So
cool.
And then also to my question, because this is about the multiverse and multi-partners, how many people actually are in the decision process when it comes to selecting or not selecting a proposed story?
Sure. Brad, why don't you take that one?
That's a good question. Well, two. The proposal, well, if you're talking about a submission that comes in de novo outside the publishing company from an author, it does not need to be agented, by the way. I will just put that out there. We are open to submissions. When a submission comes in, I will evaluate the query, which is basically the presentation. It's kind of a pitch, just like you just did. And I will look at whether I think that what I'm being told is something that we can publish and sell. Is it a popular genre? Is it a good theme? Does the author have a good grasp of what the genre is? Do they present to me a story that I think will interest readers? I will go through all of these questions in my mind, and if the answer is yes, and it's reasonably well written, then we will move it on to what we call the Submissions Review Committee, which is made up of editors and readers who have a lot of experience, years of reading and working with us, reading queer fiction, because I think that you get a very different point of view from readers than you do from editors. And I will put all that information together and I'll make a decision that we will accept it or not accept it. If it's a gray zone, I may talk to the author or send them an email and say, I'm interested in publishing this, but we're going to need some editorial changes, and this is the general scope of things. Because I don't ever want an author to sign with us and then be very upset about what the editorial process will be. If you're in-house like you are now, the proposal will come into Sandy. Sandy will review it, looking at all of the things that I just said. I mean, basically, it doesn't matter if you're in-house or not, we still have to make a decision as, is this a story we can sell? And has the author really put it together in a way that it's going to work, or are there major problems with it? Sometimes she and I will discuss it, especially if she thinks there's an issue with the story or something that maybe needs to be redirected, we'll talk about it. Our goal is to publish you. I mean, that's why we're here. So our goal when we get a proposal is to make sure that we can publish what you want to write. So in that sense, that's the two of us who will do that heavy lifting once you're in-house.
Good to know. Thank you.
You're in safe hands. Don't worry. All right. Thank you so much, Sander. Next up, we have Nance Sparks. Hi, Nance. Great to see you.
Hello.
Nance, too, is a relatively new author at BSB. Your first book just came out just very recently, so we're super excited for you.
Yeah.
So we can't wait to hear about the next one. Feel free to start your pitch whenever you're ready.
All right. I would like to pitch An Alaskan Wedding. It comes in at about 68,000 words, and this is a second chance contemporary lesbian romance. I went with a lighter read. My first book was a little bit heavier with topics, so this is just a light, fun, second chance romance that just keeps you laughing all through the whole book. So my plot summary. If you ask Sarah Hernandez what An Alaskan Wedding was about, she'd probably say that her memory's a bit foggy given all the alcohol consumed, but I'll let her tell you about it anyway. Well, the details are indeed quite foggy, yet even through the heavy whiskey haze, it was pretty clear that everyone had had a great time at our wedding, especially my sex-deprived, overly self-controlled best friend and maid of honor, Andrea Daniels. You see, she's the kind of person who always has to do the right thing. She strives for perfection at work and busts her butt for her two daughters, Sydney and Olivia. The girls are involved in all sorts of sports and after-school activities, and Andrea juggles all of this on her own, but she rarely takes any adult time for herself. So I was pretty stoked when she added an extra week to enjoy Alaska after the wedding. Who knew how wild that week would get? Okay, so here's the highlights. Kay Martin and I decided to tie the knot in her hometown of Fairbanks, Alaska. Kay has always spoiled me rotten and pulled out all the stops for our wedding. She hired the best of the best for everything, from the resort to the reception hall, catering to photography. Well, especially photography. See, Riley Cannon is the most sought after photographer for lesbian and gay weddings. She owns Candid Photography and gets these emotional shots that no one expects. And as part of her contract, she gets an itinerary of all activities, and we get the best wedding photos ever. She shoots from the shadows, and this is where the fun of the weekend really began. Well, for Andrea anyway. Everyone stayed at the Moose Lodge Resort, and the welcome party was held in a large conference hall. For icebreakers, we had appetizers, adult-sized Jenga, cornhole, and an open bar. Like I said, Kay wanted everything to be fun and perfect. I looked up from an intense game of cornhole just in time to see Andrea in a full body embrace with the photographer. And I mean serious sizzle.
Turns out that my bestie had kept a few secrets from me. Who knew she once had a wild side? Andrea had always claimed to be bisexual, but she was married to Scott, and then after the divorce, she went out to pasture like an old gray mare. I mean, she dated some, but nothing serious, and they were all guys, so I blew off the bisexual thing. Turns out that she and Riley were once a hot and heavy item. Inseparable since they met in kindergarten, and then in high school, hormones took over, and they became really inseparable. They thought they'd be together forever, but then again, when you're in high school, parents rule the roost, cooling off the lovebirds after they caught them a little too tangled up in the sheets. Then there's Scott. He kept asking Andrea out, and lost and lonely without Riley in her life, she relented and said yes. They went to a mutual friend's senior party. A little bit too much alcohol, some fun flirting led to the backseat of Scott's dad's car. As sometimes happens, the condom broke, and Andrea ended up pregnant. Poof, everything changed in an instant. All of her plans to join Riley at college and start their life together were ruined, and she owned it. She stayed behind, married Scott, and figured out how to be a mother to her newborn daughter. Now let's fast back forward to my wedding and imagine the sexual tension between these two lost lovebirds. It was fun to watch it all play out. There were 2 days of events where Riley tried like crazy to focus on the job. All the while, they really just wanted to focus on one another. After the reception, Riley was finally off the clock, and they ended up back in Andrea's room getting, let's say, reacquainted. They decided to spend the rest of their vacation in Alaska together, and these two really do know how to have fun. They found their way to a sex toy store owned by the most fabulous drag queen, eager to strut her stuff, and then later ended up soaking in a hot springs beneath the magical curtain of the Northern Lights. While sitting there in Riley's lap, sipping whiskey from a flask, Andrea couldn't help but feel like this was a life she'd missed out on. The more time they spent together, the more time she wanted. But she also worried that her mundane life would be completely incompatible with Riley's carefree existence. Where could this really lead? Was she simply setting herself up for more heartache? When they left their Alaskan bubble world and returned home, the reality of how different their lives were did cause some issues. For starters, they lived in 2 different states. Their schedules didn't mesh at all. And when they did find time together, they had 2 teenage chaperones at all times. But don't be fooled. The fun was still yet to come. The big question was, could they overcome the hurt from their past and get a second chance at love?
Awesome. Thank you so much, Nance.
You're welcome.
I love the voice that you used for the bride, right? The friend kind of narrating.
Yeah, this is the best friend. Yep.
Which is really cool, and we got a great sense of like her character and your other characters from her. My question for you is your novel told from her point of view, the bride?
No, it's actually third person, past tense, and it is in the 2 main characters, Riley and Andrea's point of view.
Okay, awesome. So
I did the pitch in a first person-ish.
Yeah, no, I mean, it totally worked, and I loved it, and I was so engaged, and I really was like, wow, that's such a great voice. My advice to you, though, is you don't want to sell the publisher on a voice that's not going to be in your book.
Good point.
So we are really impressed by the bride and her observations of these characters. And then your novel, she's kind of the side character, right? The secondary.
She's only present in about the first half of the book.
And she doesn't get a point of view, which I think is fair and appropriate. And I would be very curious about how someone would write a romance from a point of view where they're not in the romance. But it's just something to think about in terms of what you would pitch to a publisher and then what your book that you write would actually be. And I don't think there's anything wrong with pitching it in a different voice. You just want to let the publisher know, you know, that's the best friend, the bride, you know, she's going to tell you about this book that's in the point of view of, so that the publisher is aware what you're doing, because it totally worked too. So Vic, how about you? Any notes for Nance?
Yeah, I think I was going to say the same about it was a really interesting way to pitch it as the voice and kind of as that secondary character looking in. But it did suggest maybe that character was more important than they are. So yeah, I think maybe a little tweaking with regard to that. I wondered about the kind of overall conflict and how your overall conflict is going to run through your story. Because it sounds like they kind of meet, have the hots for each other again, and just go for it. So what is kind of really keeping them apart? Because you say they have teenage chaperones, but lots of people in second chance romances have kids. So what is it that actually keeps them apart?
Well, with these two characters, the big hurdle that they have to overcome is their different, figuring out their different lifestyles. Andrea's world is her career as a registered nurse and her two children and their events and sports, and her life is very tied down to her town. So where she lives is where she lives. Whereas Riley travels all over the country and has a very carefree, footloose lifestyle. And her, her hotel bed isn't always empty. So it's just trying to figure out how to navigate all of that without making anyone feel like they've given up on anything. So that's the conflict that they have, is just trying to navigate through all of those different changes. And and children do add a different aspect, whereas not everybody wants children. So there's that aspect too, just trying to figure all of those hurdles out.
Cool. Great. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Red, any comments?
I agree with you. I think that the children issue, if it's going to be an issue, in addition to obviously getting in the way of romantic interludes, has to be, does this carefree person suddenly want to have a ready-made family? But I think that you are missing a great opportunity here to create real conflict in this relationship, because you have teenage lovers. And those of us who have, fallen in love as teenagers, they tend to leave impressions forever. And if these two were really, really serious about each other, and then one goes off to college, and then suddenly the other one gets involved with a boy, and not only gets involved with a boy, but gets pregnant and marries him, there has to be a lot of anger and resentment and disappointment. And that's the real conflict. I mean, when they come back together, they may have those memories and that lingering attraction and compulsion to be together. And that could even get them into bed together, but it's not going to solve that, what has to be really a deep, heartfelt pain of that separation. And I think that's the true conflict in reunion stories, is how do we heal the wounds that were created by the separation? Because even though it was forced on them by their parents, somehow always is the thought that she could have found me. She could have waited. She could have, when she was 18, 19, 20, she could have come after me. You have to use that in this story, whether it's lighthearted or not, because that's what your readers are going to want to know, because they've been there. Okay.
And it is certainly addressed to the story.
Don't lose those opportunities.
Yeah.
Sorry.
It is certainly addressed to the story. I just didn't pitch it. So I should have.
Well, you need to pitch it. You need to pitch it.
I should have put that in my pitch.
That's the heart of a romance. Okay. Is that angst and those wounds that have to heal. That's what romance is about. Okay.
Perfect.
Awesome. And that's why we ask questions, so that you can elaborate on those things that may not have made it in the pitch, because it is a short amount of time and it's hard to get everything in there.
Yeah, it is curious of making sure that you get all of the intrigue and, the fun of the story and all of the conflict and everything in that, because I actually had two different versions of my pitch written, and one of them did address all of that conflict, but it was so dry to read. so I rewrote it, giving it a little bit of spice. And
yeah, it's
good
information. It was a good pitch. It was a good pitch.
Awesome. Yeah. Thank you so much.
That is one of the difficult things about pitches, isn't it? Is figuring out that balance between the conflict and the difficulties and the romance and the fun, and making it all mesh together.
Exactly. This is such a great tool to review all of those options, and to see how to balance all that in 5 minutes.
Thank you so much. All right. Next up, last but certainly not least, we have Nathan Burgoine. Hi, Nathan.
Hello.
Good to see you again. I see your bookshelf matches Rad's. That's always a good start. Nathan is a veteran author here at Bold Strokes Books. Many publications under his belt. He also is a wonderful at pitching books. We chose him for this and had him go last because we didn't want anyone to have to follow him. He's so very well. So please sit back and enjoy, as will we, Nathan Burgoine pitching us his next book.
I have an unintentional complication. I just have my aura beginning. So I've got one working eye right now. But this is a great example of how you get to pitch when you get to pitch, not when you feel like it. Okay. So this is a pitch for A Little Village Blend. A Little Village Blend is a 16,000 word contemporary romance novella with a dash of speculative fiction closer to what we would generally call fabulism. It's set in my ongoing village collection of novellas. It would be the fourth, but it's important to note that those series can be read in any order and each one is a gateway to all the others. A quick blurb here. According to Ivan's sister Anya, Ivan's tea leaves promise that his perfect match is out there somewhere, just waiting to be swept off his feet. And Ivan knows that Anya's always right, the most annoying trait in a sister if ever there was one. Ivan's own knack with tea might not deal with the future, but it's really good at helping with the present. When Walt, a tall, dark, and grumpy soldier, shows up at his store, Nice Teas, in an obvious need of a hand and a dog sitter, Ivan rises to the challenge on both fronts and offers blends to make Walt's life a little easier. There's just no way he can help from falling for the guy, but Anya says that Walt is absolutely not the one, and the tea leaves don't lie. Is it worth steeping here and now when you're waiting for the one and only? Ivan's not sure, but everything in his heart tells him that it's just a matter of finding the right blend. So we're back in the village, which is my loosely connected series of novellas, all of which, again, are non-sequential and focus on themes of chosen family, the queer-lived realities, but still low angst. So I do try to put our real world into the village, but with happy ever afters, of course. It also includes a range of queer alphabet. I find something that's missing in a lot of gay romance, especially, is, you know, lesbians, trans people, anybody else in the queer umbrella. And community support and the notion of an ongoing history. So I have a recurring character, for example, Marion, who is a lesbian who was there at the start of the gay rights movement. She pops up in every one of these stories for a little cameo. Also, there's a super cute rescued fluffy husky, which always gets good attention. Genre-wise, if you think practical magic, Mistress of Spices, or chocolat, only gay, that's the level of fabulism we're talking about. And right now, my experiences have been that my novella-length romances are hitting a real sweet spot among gay romance readers. That I think most of it is about the length and the amount of investment in time and energy in reading and getting to the happy ever after without that long drawn-out level of angst. Trope-wise, what I've done is I've basically taken the idea of the fated mate or the fated love triangle and then inverted it. So Ivan's facing someone who he has been told this is not the right guy, but he can't stop feeling that it is. So the conflict is all on his part anyway, between knowing versus feeling. And the other half of the conflict is that Walt, he's told by his sister when she reads these tea leaves that Walt's life is falling apart. And Ivan keeps trying to get him to sort of open up about that, and Walt just doesn't do it. So Ivan is slowly convinced that no, this man won't even tell me what's wrong with his life. I need to get him out of my head, but he can't help it. He just feels for this guy. And so, you know, he ends up looking after the man's dog, which keeps them connected even when Ivan's like, no, I need to stay away. I've published 4 novellas in this series. Each one seems to do better than the last, which sort of kicks the habit in the way that novella series roll out. So I'm hoping that that still goes in my favor. And other than that, I think the biggest piece I'd like to add on is that I appreciate how much you've all been very accommodating with me in the past year or two. I had an injury, and as you know, long bursts of writing is no longer an option for me. So the fact that Bold Strokes continues to listen to me when I pitch novellas is greatly appreciated.
Oh, you're so welcome. Thank you. As anticipated, great pitch. I love how you situated this novella within the context of your other publications. Which is a great thing to do for you and for any author who has multiple publications with us or elsewhere. is to not just situate it in terms of the outside world and the culture and where it fits there, but where it fits within your own body of work, because authors have readerships. And if this is going to appeal to an already established readership, then that's a great thing for the publisher to know going forward. This is really short. And so a lot of the kind of plot elements and conflict elements that you would see in a longer work don't apply in the same way because of the length. What I would like to see, if I was going to give you any kind of feedback, would be to do a little bit of what Nance just did and give us a sense of your character from his point of view, because it's going to be him and his voice and his, internal experience that drives this story because of the length, right? And I think showing us his voice, you can do a lot in a very short amount of time to tell us exactly what this book is, because it's his book.
Yeah, so Ivan is 100% a caregiver. And you find out throughout his background, he looked after his sister when his father was battling alcoholism. Then he looked after his father when his father was sort of going into a sober state. So his gut reaction is always to help people, and that's led him down troubled paths before. And that's why his sister is so adamant, like, no, not this guy. But yes, you're right. That is definitely something I should have said.
Okay. Love it. Totally. Rad, how about you? Any comments?
Yeah, I think it was a great pitch. What I liked about it, it's a really smart pitch, which doesn't surprise me. I don't know if you mentioned that Nathan is a bookseller, but he hit all the key words that are going to make a publisher think to themselves, this person knows what they're doing. He presented a theme, he presented tropes. He positioned, as you said, his novel within the context of his other works. He also positioned his characters who are recurring within the context of his other works. I mean, publishers like to build on authors' works. That's the whole point. I mean, that's why we want you in-house, so that we can publish your work, so that we can build on your energy and your creativity. And you showed us in this pitch that that's what you're doing too. So that's a very smart pitch. For a first-time pitcher, that may be very difficult to do. But I think that if you've never pitched before, one thing you can think about is, what is the message in my story? And that is essentially the theme. And you don't need to worry about whether you know the words or not, but you need to know the story that you're writing. And that's what you showed us really well. I think it's interesting that you said that you turned the fated love trope on its head, because you really didn't. I mean, Ivan knew from the beginning that this was the guy. He just intellectually didn't want to believe it, because he was believing outside influences, which actually often happens in fated love. I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but I mean, I think that's the strength of it. If you're going to tell a romance in 16,000 words, then the reader has to be convinced that they actually are meant to be lovers and that they are in love. And it's going to be this little whatever it is inside of Ivan that drives the romance. So I just thought that was kind of interesting. And I love the blurb that you gave at the beginning of the pitch, which is practically the blurb. It has all the words that tie in, the steeped and, the blend and everything that comes back to tea. So, and of course, tea leaves being the predictor of the future. So it's all put together in a very smart way. 16,000 words is a really short period of time to write a romance. So you're going to have to work really hard to show the chemistry between these two guys, which is it's not something we can see in the pitch, but that's going to, what you're going to need to do when you write this is really, if you're writing a romance, you're going to have to convince your readers that there's a critical connection between these two guys as they work out all the other stuff.
Easy peasy, right?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Vic, any comments for Nathan?
Kind of, it's all been said, Nathan. I think, it was obviously really exceptionally well done. I liked your genre comparisons. I think one of the things I really liked was the tone. You let us know the tone of what you write as well, that humor was in there and it was really clear. And I think that's always a nice thing to know, kind of what you're getting into. You mentioned the cast of characters, and I always love your cast of characters. But as has already been said, 16,000 words, there's not a lot of room for secondary characters when you're building a romance. So I would just be wary of giving too much page time to a great cast of secondary characters, because you could sacrifice some of that romance time that you need.
It may be, and it's hard to know, but it may be that it's not the romance that's attracting your readers. I'm not saying it's not important or that it's not, the structure of the story that you're writing, but it may very well be the wider universe. I mean, in this little town, little village that you've created. So it's a balancing act, because, it's hard to know sometimes why readers come back. But in this case, in particular, as Victoria said, everybody probably can't show up.
Right.
You also have multiple publications too. You can do little bits of secondary characters, but if you have 10 of them, that adds up to a lot of time over,
Yeah, I think that's something I have worked on over the last few books, to make sure that it's an Easter egg. It's not an Easter parade.
Yeah, that's good.
Awesome.
It's tough. Yeah.
Do you have
Great
any questions?
Actually, I'm going to do a semi-selfish question and pretend that this is the first time I pitch, but what changes when we are talking about shorter works of fiction, like when we're talking novellas rather than novels?
Mm-hmm. So do you mean in terms of how your book is published,
or maybe from a point of view of expectations from the reader, like what extra work or what is different when it comes to things like promotion or the like?
That's a really good question. I think what you mentioned previously when you were talking about the benefits of the shorter novel and how those appeal to readers, I think is absolutely spot on. There is a segment of our readership that likes the shorter length. And I think too, there's a need for a long short story length, which is kind of where you're at. Some of the feedback that we get on, say, short story collections is that they're too short. Readers want more. But generally people who are drawn to short stories like the short format. And I feel like our culture is going that way in terms of a lot of the media that we are all consuming now is short format, low, attention type of media. So I feel like there is a market for this, and it is kind of emerging and building, but there's also a lot of opportunities to build on short format works. So in terms of what you're doing with making it a collection. And so then if it's a collection all set in the same place with recurring characters, that is going to appeal to longer format readers, right? It's going to read more like a novel, and they're going to see those characters over and over again. And so I think that's really smart. And that's what I would encourage you to do if you hadn't come up with it on your own. Brad, do you have any thoughts in terms of the kind of the marketing aspect?
Well, I don't think we market them any differently in the sense of presenting them to the readers. So I think it gets the same marketing push. I do think, as you noted, Nathan, that I don't know why your sales are progressing up. What I would anticipate is that they're leveling, you're pulling up your backlist, which may happen. If your more recent ones are selling a little more, it's probably going to boost up that backlist eventually, and then they may actually plateau. I think currently the readership is probably smaller overall. If you were going to compare the readership for a novel versus the readership for a novella, I think short form at this point is not as popular, but it is definitely gaining in popularity. And I think if that's what you're good at writing and that's what you want to write, I think that it can be developed. And as Sandy said, if you have a collection that is connected so that readers can revisit or see some of the characters or have anticipation for what's going to happen to some of the characters you put in a novel or in the novella for a future novella. That's the other thing you can do, is seed it with interesting characters that then you can write in the future. Then you can keep them connected to this. And, you know, you can always pitch to your publisher putting them all together, because maybe that would work too.
Two quick other things that spring to mind as Rad was talking. One is that shorter fiction is generally faster to write than a novel, and faster to publish than a novel. And so someone who writes short form fiction frequently can have more publications over time and be in kind of the reader's eye in that kind of new publication space much more frequently, which I think can be really helpful. And also the price point for a 16,000 word work is going to be less than for a 75,000 word work. And so that may appeal to a new segment of readers too, in terms of your initial kind of outlay is smaller, which, may help in terms of readership and interest. All right, awesome. Thank you so much, Nathan. If everyone can just jump back really quick. Thank you, thank you. Thank you all so much for being here. They were amazing pitches. You did a wonderful job. We want all your books. I hope this was helpful for anyone watching who was wondering how you might pitch a book to a publisher. These guys gave great examples, and we are always happy to answer any questions that you may have. If you are interested in pitching to Bold Strokes Books, we are offering a pitch session to you after our Pubfest event. For details on that, please email Carson at boldstrokesbooks.com. That's CARSEN at boldstrokesbooks.com, and she will provide you with all the information and set up a time to meet with us to do exactly what these guys just did. Thank you so much, and we will see you later. Bye.
Thank you all. Great job.
You.